Welcome to Reading Between the Reels. I'm Matt Leader.
And I'm Craig Dickinson. Today on the show, we conclude our series on Batman film introductions with the movie I've been wanting to do for a while, Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, the Ultimate Edition. And I can see Matt's rolling his eyes. He's very excited to do this. Hope you're as excited as we are to talk about it. Matt, what are your overall thoughts for Batman v Superman?
So, Batman versus Superman, BVS, is a really, I found it a very difficult movie to watch for a couple different reasons. The first being that I first saw this movie in theaters, so I saw the theatrical cut, and it is vastly different than the Ultimate Edition. And so there's a lot of kind of negative connotation just on a personal level that I have towards this film because I paid good money in the theater to go watch it, and it is a mess. It is just like gallon of milk spilled on the floor, just awful, right? The theatrical cut is very different. The ultimate cut, on the other hand, it ultimately does improve the film, but I don't think that it's really a good movie. And that's kind of what I want to focus on today. And what's really difficult about BVS is that there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of parts that go into making this film. Like there's different stories, you get the different characters, there's just a lot going on. And you know, with the Ultimate Edition, it adds another, I think like 30 minutes or more to the theatrical cut, in addition to like really rearranging the editing of the film. The most, well, I shouldn't say the most positive, because there are a few things that I like, and I will bring them up. But the Ultimate Edition is a watchable film, and I think that's my overall thought is that it's a watchable film, but it's a lot like cotton candy, in that there's some sweet spots, but it quickly dissolves into nothing.
Okay. Fairly generous. And yeah, it is 30 minutes longer than the theatrical cut.
And so like
and
that's three hours, over 3 hours.
Yeah, it's a little over three. I think it's 3 hours and 2 minutes. And yeah, you mentioned the editing is different too, which is like the most bizarre thing, you know. And there's a great quote I found in researching this film from Chris Terrio that said it was an act of sabotage by the studio to have released the version that they did. It was not the version that they had obviously filmed and had ready, because when it came time for home video, here's the 3 hour cut, which is, even most detractors would say it's a better film. They may not say it's a great film or even a good film, but they'll at least say it's better than what we got in the theaters.
And significantly better.
Yeah. And, you know, word of mouth, I think, just killed this film, because it had the massive opening weekend, but then it was like, well, yeah, I saw it, and then these are the things I didn't like about it. I loved the movie from the beginning, even the theatrical cut. I didn't see it the opening weekend. I saw it a couple weekends after. I even had the death of Superman spoiled for me by one of my students, which became an interesting lecture about why we are careful with spoilers. It had been rumored, so it wasn't a massive shock to me. I was like, yeah, I know they've been wanting to do that storyline for a while, but I love Man of Steel. That is one of my all-time favorite films. I've always liked Superman. He's my favorite superhero. And so one of the things I really liked about this film was how it connected to Man of Steel, especially having kind of reshooting that the opening scene where you see actually that Bruce Wayne was in Metropolis while it was going on. And I really like how they kind of have like this meta commentary about the destruction in Metropolis that a lot of people had, you know, as talking points. And one of the criticisms of Man of Steel was how much destruction and the loss of life in Krypton, in Metropolis. And so they've kind of addressed that by, you know, giving, you know, in the person of Bruce Wayne, that, you know, he's the one who's upset about that. So if you were upset about Man of Steel, hey, Batman's your guy, right? He's kind of the stand-in for the audience in that case. And I've always thought that the biggest thing that people don't like, and I could be wrong because it's a little bit of a straw man argument, I suppose, because I love the film. I'm like, what is the things that people don't like? And I always assume, maybe incorrectly, that it's really the characterizations that really is the thing that stick with people. They don't like the way Batman is portrayed. And we've talked in earlier shows about Batman killing and how that comes across as him being super violent at the beginning of this film. But I never had a problem with that. I think there's a lot of, and we'll talk about this as we get in, a lot of hints earlier that's it's setting up Alfred as definitely like his conscience, that Batman's the bad guy, intentionally so, for most of this film. And it's kind of a hero's journey film for him in a lot of ways, which is interesting as it's his introduction into the DCEU. But I do think my last thought I'm just going to say is I do think that it's a really powerful examination of our preconceived ideas about who's good and who's not. I think it really asks some interesting questions. And maybe that speaks to me and it doesn't speak to other people, but that's where I come down on it.
I think that's what I will say. That this is that it's it's great that you love the film. I think that's fantastic because like who doesn't want a film that you enjoy? And I think this is actually kind of like a meta conversation about movies in general. That it's okay to like something and it's okay to not like something, and that it doesn't mean that you have to like you can disagree without being a jerk to the other person.
Yeah.
And like Craig and I have long discussed this film just on our own, and I think we already have a pretty good idea of like how we both feel about the film. And I will say that there, I spent a lot of this time like watching this movie, examining what didn't work for me, because it really ultimately doesn't, but it's also in a way it does. And that's what I really grappled with this time. And so this is going to be an episode that I'm pretty light on specific examples of some of the cinematography and color, because I think that overall, like moment to moment, the film is made quite competently. Where, just giving you an example, and this is the best part of the film in my opinion, is the opening 10 minutes. Not necessarily the Wayne's murder, although I think it's filmed, quite nice, very visually pleasing with the slow motion. And I will come back to this point, but this time I remember that Bruce Wayne's father says Martha, right, as he's lying on the ground. So I will come back to that because we will talk about Martha.
Of course we will.
So I didn't think it was necessary, but fine. It's Batman intro. Okay, that works. And it's pretty short. Beginning of the film, like, I think that's fine. But the 9/11 commentary, essentially, I mean, we all know that's kind of what it's at least visually referencing, with Bruce Wayne running into the cloud of dust. And anyone who's lived through that and watch that on TV, I don't know if you could see that and not immediately think of 9/11. And it's quite gripping. And this is where it's like that moment to moment of seeing Bruce Wayne. He takes off in the car, he gets out and, he's calling, I forget who it is he's calling in Wayne Tower, but, he hops out, and as the tower crumbles, you see him taking off toward the building, right? And I think that's some very nice, character work for Bruce Wayne. You see him, lifting the beam off his coworker, who we see later in the film, and then we see him save like the little girl and holding the little girl, looking up and seeing Superman, and it's like you're getting everything that's going on. I think that my issue really stems from the fact that this movie is trying to dig deep and trying to say something, but ultimately it doesn't really have anything to say. The best way that I can kind of try to explain it is, when we're talking to our students about theme, we always tell them theme is never a word. It has to be a sentence, right? You have to say something. You can't just say the theme is war. That doesn't work. Right. And this is where I feel like Snyder and company are saying 9/11. And it's like, okay, sure. Like, not what I was expecting, but okay, let's, take me on the ride. And then there's not much else he has to say about it. It's kind of dropped. And there's several moments throughout the film where I feel like Snyder and Terrio, and who are the other writers on this?
Let me double check here really
Yeah,
quickly. Yeah, so David
Goyer.
Goyer wrote the first draft, and then Terrio came in later to do rewrites.
Right. I feel like they were throwing things out there. And one of the quotes where, and this is kind of, you know, where this you got me on this track right here by saying that Batman's the bad guy, right? At least in
Hmm.
the beginning. When he and Alfred are talking, and Alfred says, "You're going to war." Bruce Wayne says, "That son of a bitch brought the war to us 2 years ago. Alfred, count the dead, thousands of people. What's next? Millions. He has the power to wipe out the entire human race. If we believe there's even a 1% chance that he is our enemy, we have to take it as an absolute certainty and we have to destroy him." That is abhorrent.
Only a Sith deals in absolute.
Exactly. And I think it's exactly what you said, that he has this preconceived notion of who Superman is, right?
Yeah.
And he's not necessarily wrong in the sense that Superman is extremely powerful, but he is wrong in judging his character, right? And that kind of attitude right there is a very interesting philosophical lens to examine. That's the mindset that Bruce Wayne is in, right? But I feel like we never get a truly earned thematic statement about that. It's another instance of something that's put out there that's interesting, but the thought is never followed through enough to conclusion where they actually say something about this in a way that's earned. And I knew I threw a bunch of stuff out there, so I'm going to
Yeah.
give you a chance to kind of talk a little bit too.
Okay. Yeah. No, some really good stuff. I'm really glad you brought up the shot of Bruce running into the smoke and the debris, because I had that as well. As that's one of the very first shots we get to see of Affleck playing Bruce Wayne, and I think, and again, it's characterization. Like, look how brave this guy is, and he just doesn't care. And so at this point, yeah, on this rewatch, and I've seen this movie probably 20 times. I think there was a lot of things that I noticed that it made me kind of reevaluate my opinion of the film and of the Batman as the villain in particular. I think that really, when you have the kind of it's essentially a prologue, right, where it's kind of the end of Man of Steel, where you see Bruce there. I don't think that at that point he is the bad guy. I think that this is the moment where he's pushed into that, and I think that there are some kind of telltale signs that this is what the filmmakers are trying to do. I think that there is the same shot, and it kind of speaks to performance as well. You see the look on his face as he's looking up at the end when he's holding the little girl. It's the same look he has on his face when he's looking at the vandalized Robin suit. And you see it a couple other times where you have this progression of, I'm powerless. I could not stop this. And I think that this is kind of the moment. I think that's what they're trying to tell us, is that this is the moment where he realizes that everything he's been doing is adding up to nothing. It's not enough. He can never do enough to really accomplish his mission. And he feels like he's a failure. And that's where he kind of just snaps.
I do think that you're correct. I think that's definitely the same reading that I got from that. What I would say is I would just describe it as it's the moment that Batman, Bruce Wayne, is radicalized.
Mm-hmm.
It's
That's a good word for it.
it's the moment when he takes whatever ideas of justice and whatever that he values, and it goes too far to the extreme, where that quote that I just mentioned about the 1% chance that he could destroy us, we have to destroy him. That's the moment where that kind of clicks into place.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, that's the mentality I have to basically have if I'm going to deal with Superman. What I would ask you is, what, for, like I said, for me, I find that
Mm-hmm.
a pretty horrific mentality to have,
Sure.
because it does not give anybody a chance, right? Because all of us have a 1% chance or something, a non-zero chance of
Yeah.
doing evil things. So it's like, what does the movie have to say about that? Like, within the text of the film, what's the response? Because we're juggling around this idea of Batman is at some point is the bad guy. He has the bad mentality, right?
Mhm.
What's the movie have to say about it, though? I guess that's kind of my thing that I'm struggling with.
Sure. Well, another thing I was struck by is how much this is, and we haven't ever gotten a proper sequel to Man of Steel. Darn it, I'd still like to see one, because I think it's earned. But I think that this really does build off some of the themes that Goyer and Snyder wanted to accomplish in Man of Steel. Whereas if a powerful alien came to our Earth, like how would he be treated? Would he just be adopted immediately, like we see in a lot of Superman media, or would there be this natural distrust of him? And I think that's one of the big things that I think this film does. It does a lot with kind of meta commentary as well, where you're getting like newscasts. You see Neil deGrasse Tyson and a bunch of other guys, and they're Holly Hunter's character talking about is Superman, like what's the role that Superman should play?
Mm-hmm.
Is he, somebody says, is he, maybe he's not a Christ figure or a Satan figure. He's just, a guy who's that powerful. And so again, whether or not it works is a different question. But I think that what they're trying to accomplish is, had this happen in a real world, there would be people who would be naturally distrustful of him. And so we have Batman who has, been in the shadows for 20 years, has a very small, we talk about echo chambers sometimes, right? Like on the internet, I only listen to these people and I, block everybody else. He doesn't listen to anybody at this point. Like even Alfred, his closest confidant, is telling him, dude, you can't do this. And he doesn't care. He's kind of gotten himself into this cycle of rationalization, right? You got into the part where he's branding guys now. And then you have, Superman who's looking at him and not knowing him because he's not a public figure and going, well, this is a vigilante who's super violent and he has to be stopped. And they don't know each other. And I think that's an interesting thing too, where we go, well, of course, Batman and Superman are friends. We've always seen them as friends, but before they meet each other, there's not really any legitimate logical reason that they'd be friends. They have very different ways of handling things.
Yeah. I think I think you're right that, they are, while they're both, superheroes, they both go about it different ways. And for me, it's like, okay, so we take Batman. We have at least a thesis statement for Batman's MO, right?
Sure.
And I think that's a great point. I'm glad you brought up the branding, because I think that's a very interesting choice.
Yeah,
it's pretty dark because it feels very,
very
much,
dark.
Yeah, like torture.
Yeah.
Among other things. But what's kind of Superman's MO, and what's his thesis statement? What's his philosophy? And I will throw this out there because when Man of Steel came out, I rented it from Redbox many moons ago and never finished it because I didn't like it.
Oh my gosh.
And I still have never finished it.
So, oh my gosh, we have to do the movie. I love that movie so much.
So I could be missing a little bit of context from that film, and I admit that. But it felt like there was one moment when after the Capitol bombing, when Lois and Superman's out on the balcony, and she's saying like this, pointing to the S on Superman's chest. This means something.
Right.
Now, my question is, what does it mean? They never answer that question. They never, to me, they never explicitly say this is what Superman stands for, right, as contrasted to what Batman stands for in this film, right? Because obviously there's other media and stuff that we could look at, but within the context of this film, I felt like I was missing that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, did you get to that part in Man of Steel where he's sitting with Lois and after he surrendered himself, and she looks at him across the table and says, "What's the S for?"
No.
And he says, and it's in the trailer too, and he says, "It's not an S. On my world, it means hope."
Yeah.
So it's a symbol. It's literally a symbol of hope for the Kryptonian people. And so I take it as that's a direct reference to that you're a symbol of hope. This S on your chest is a symbol of hope. Therefore, you are a symbol of hope. And I think that's one. Oh, go ahead.
And I get that. And that I kind of figured, because she mentions hope even in that scene.
Right.
But it goes back to my point that theme is never a word. It has to be a sentence.
Sure. No,
and,
totally.
and along
I
with
think in
that,
the,
and I'll just throw this out there real quick, and then
yeah.
I'll let you talk. Is that it seems also very confused about what the general populace feels about Superman. Because I will say, to the Ultimate Edition's credit, you do see Superman saving a few more people, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we also have a lot of talk about how does Superman decide who lives, who dies. But it's
Mm-hmm.
not really fair to Superman, right? Like, he can't be everywhere at once.
Right.
Even
Yeah.
Superman can't be everywhere. So it's like you're blaming him for, for trying. Like it just feels like, yes, there's images of, especially outside the Capitol, the defacing of the statue at the beginning of the film, where there
Right.
are some people who hate Superman, maybe because they fear him. And then there's some people, maybe somewhere, who like him, but it's not really explained why they fear him, why they like him. I can kind of infer why they fear him. That's not too hard, right? But it's like, as far as why they have hope in him, why they love Superman, I don't get that.
Okay. So a couple of things, because I do want to kind of touch on uh, cinematography as well as really nice things together. I'm loving this discussion so much. So first off, yes, you need to watch the Ultimate Edition, and the newest versions are in. They have half dozen scenes in IMAX, which are gorgeous, and it's updating. I've noticed it's updating. If you bought the digital copy, it's updated. So like on YouTube, which was where I watched it, it was updated. It's HBO Max. It's updated on there as well. So there's a couple of scenes that are fantastic with that. Some of them I wish more of which the big most of the fight with the two of them is in IMAX, and we'll get to those kind of things. The nightmare sequence is in IMAX as well. But the scene of him rescuing the girl in Mexico, and those people are essentially worshiping him, that is a very evocative scene. You have this scene where he's in silhouette, essentially behind the sun, or right in front of the sun, as the lady on the house that's being flooded reaching up to him, where you have him very much like a god figure. He's a very Jesus figure in this film, in all of Snyder's films, really. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the end. There's some more um, imagery for that as well. But I think that, again, thinking of themes, and I love that you're challenging me on this, because I did think a lot about this. That that really is, and I had it for Hero's Journey, but I'll just go ahead and drop it here because I think it's relevant now. Is that you kind of have parallel Hero's Journey because of this? You do have, we talked about Batman's kind of path to redemption, right, and becoming the Batman that we know, which is kind of an interesting thing, right? Because he's a very veteran Batman. We've had, Keaton's Batman, who's hasn't been doing it too long. He's, I don't know, 5-10 years. We can probably guess roughly about that long. And then Bell's Batman, obviously starting out. This Batman's been around for much longer than those things and still has been working in the shadows. And then ultimately has to go through this film, the events of this film, to become, the Batman that we're familiar with. But you also have, I think, Clark's journey of self-realization, that ultimately he was Superman kind of because his dad wanted him to be Superman, that he'd been given, and both of his dads, he even got that from Jor-El in Man of Steel. Like, this is your destiny. This is what you need to do. They're going to follow you, they'll join you in the sun. There's a lot of that. And it's very inspirational, but it's also kind of a heavy burden for him. And I think that's what you're seeing on the balcony with Lois too. And then you also have that kind of contrasted with, this scene with his mom. And she's basically like, yeah, be all those things or be none of it. You don't owe them anything. And I know some people have criticized that. Seems like, why would she say that? But like, if it was your kid and you could say, look, I want you to choose what you could do. And if you're going to be Superman, and I think that's ultimately where we get at the end, is that he chooses to be Superman regardless of the consequences, because we do get that we have, for instance, all those people that are blown up in the Senate building, all those people die because he exists, because Luthor is trying to make a point. So he didn't cause it directly, but they died because he was there. And that's another thing that, this version of the film does a much better job than the theatrical version, where he's being blamed for killing all of those guys in Africa. because in the Ultimate Edition they show they're using a flamethrower. So we go, okay, heat vision. That's what we killed them. Cutting that scene out, we're like, Superman didn't kill those guys with a machine gun. What's the connection? It doesn't make any sense. Just egregious, lots of stuff like that.
So, yes. So when I said at the beginning that the theatrical cut was a mess, that's like a perfect example of it. So along those lines, I I actually think that I like your version of BVS better than Snyder's version of BVS. And what I mean by that is that I actually think that's a quite beautiful theme, like a message of choosing who you are, right? And that's what I mean by it feels half baked. It doesn't feel like it takes that next step where it sets up this idea of, Martha saying, be who you want to be who they want you to be, you choose, you choose. And it never makes that next step of, I am choosing to be this. I am choosing to be the hero, the Batman that we know and that we love. It doesn't feel like it gets there. I think you can infer it, but I think that it's very weak textually speaking. And an example of this is, this idea of choice and the senator played by
Holly Hunter.
Yes, Holly Hunter. She has like a fairly significant role in the plot, right? And she makes a very big point of standing up to Lex Luthor. Like, she does not back down. No. In that trial, when Superman walks in, right? I mean, that's a pretty on the nose metaphor, if you will, for putting the idea of this godlike figure on trial, right?
Sure.
And I just think it's very indicative that Holly Hunter starts this speech about, we're a democracy. In a democracy, you speak, you speak your mind, you speak your truth. But guess what? Superman never does.
Yeah, he doesn't speak in that.
He doesn't say a damn word. And it's like,
he was waiting for her to finish her opening remarks.
No,
he's so polite. He's from Kansas.
Yeah, I get that. But it's like, these are the people who wrote the movie. They could have written more time into the film. Like, and that's what I mean by, like, we never get that step of, like, of Superman explaining to the world what he stands for. And I don't think we get enough of his action to really demonstrate that. Yes, the scene in Mexico, you said, I think it was evocative, him, the Christ figure, yeah, right, coming down. And I think it's 100% true. It is evocative. It's just not deep. It's not meaningful. I did not find it meaningful in the sense of, like, okay, if he's this kind of godlike figure, this Christ figure, what does that mean? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Like, what are you trying to say about this? You brought it up. Now finish the sentence.
Sure.
And that's where that's to me one of the quotes, trying to come back a little bit away from my rants and back into the aspects. Yeah. The lack of a quote, I think, is criminal. The fact that Superman does not get a chance to explain, here is what I'm doing. Because I think you could make the argument that it's like he's trying to figure himself out. He is trying to figure out who he is and what role he has to play in the world, and being a savior or not being a savior. And it's like you had a perfect opportunity to elaborate and say something profound. And instead he sits there broodingly, and then it all blows up. And the last thing before I end my rant for now, again, is that I feel like that's very much a Snyder film, which is conflict without talking. There's lots of conflict, but there is not emotional connection between the characters. There is not dialogue between the characters. I'm sorry, I got one more thing that's popping into my head. This is going to be a very ranty episode.
Yes.
Comparing this a little bit, fairly or unfairly, to Captain America's Civil War. because I think on a very surface level, they are somewhat similar. You have two heroes, Iron Man, Tony Stark, Captain America, and then obviously Batman and Superman, who are going head to head, butting heads with each other. And the one thing that I think that Captain America Civil War does better is that it pretty clearly states that there's a philosophical difference between Cap and Iron Man. That Cap thinks that we need to be free to do what needs to be done to save people. We cannot be bound by the Sokovia Accord. We cannot be bound by laws that are going to restrict us and prevent us from saving people. Iron Man, Tony, says, no, we have to abide by the laws. And they have a discussion. They sit down at a table and they hash it out. And it's not resolved. But that's where the conflict between those two people come from, right? And with Batman and Superman, I got the lines, and I can't remember if this is the first time that they meet, but they, what does he say? The bat's dead.
Yep.
And bury it.
Yep.
And like consider this mercy. And then what does Batman say? Do you bleed?
Do you bleed? Yeah.
And it's like,
well, these guys aren't friends. You got to also remember that
but neither
Tony
are
and Cap have been friends
but
for
they're not
4 years.
They're not really friends.
4 years of working together.
They're work colleagues. I mean, if we're being real, they're not really friends. Because
I'm a friend from work. Well, they're a lot more friends than Clark and Bruce are, though.
I will give you that.
Yeah.
But it's also like you're not giving it a chance. Like your first step is to threaten, right? Like if we had a student who's trying to conflict resolve, right?
Sure.
And their first thing was, you're dead. And the next kid said, do you bleed? We'd be like, no.
Yeah.
Take a deep breath. Try again in 5 minutes, right? Yep. And so I feel like I'm watching my two middle schoolers squabble over whose pencil it is and threatening each other. And it's like, no, act like adults just for a second. Then we can get to the squabble over the pencil. Act like adults for 2 minutes. Have a discussion. Say why you don't like the way Superman is going about it. Say why you don't like the way Batman's doing it. And there is a little bit of this, but they don't say it to each other. And that's where it's like there's no connection between these two characters. It's just immediately, well, I don't like you, so we're going to fight.
Yeah. Well,
okay,
I think you're not giving enough. Yeah, you're not giving enough credit to Lex Luthor and his plot to manipulate these two guys, because I think that's part of the issue, is that he's keeping them separate. Because if they would just sit down and have a conversation about what's going on, then we'd have something. I'm thinking now of that scene. Right before that scene, Batman's just killing dudes left and right as he's going after that kryptonite, and Superman's clearly on scene when he's there. So if I'm observing this vigilante who I've already seen branding dudes and getting this guy killed in prison, and then talking to the guy's wife about it and his little kid, because that scene also, not in the theatrical cut, but in the Ultimate Edition, where he's feeling empathy for that. He's like, I've seen this guy do violence. And yes, could he have handled it a little softer? Yes. Is he fully realized Superman? Not at this point. You have to get to Justice League for that. And Man of Steel 2. Make it happen, people.
And I get that. I get what you're saying, but it's still like, okay, so, you bring up a good point that Superman is watching Batman essentially kill these people, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so it's like, okay, clearly Superman's not okay with that. And he says as much, at some point when they're at the party, at Lex Luthor's party, where he's like, the Batman's a vigilante, takes the justice into his own hands and that kind of thing. But it's like, they're kind of holding back because they're not in their personas, right? They're at the party. Mm-hmm. They're kind of being a little distant. I can't get over the idea of like Superman coming down and being like, what you did was wrong. You cannot do that. And if you do it again, I will have to do something about it, right? But it's saying like there is a consequence to your actions. When you go on a murder spree, I can't allow that to happen. It's very different than the bat is dead. consider this mercy.
Right.
And
I hear
then,
what you're saying.
and so it's just like, that's where it's just so like not elegant.
No, it's not. You would like a more polished Superman in that scene. And that's just we just don't have that version of the character yet in this scene. I get what you're saying.
I know.
I do. I totally see where
Yeah.
you're coming from.
And I will throw this out there because I have to get it out. Because, you said that, and you might have to remind me exactly what you said, but something about like, okay, if they sit down and have a conversation, maybe this doesn't happen the way it does, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, I take a look at these heroes, and I don't think either one of them are really people you look up to, because you would hope that adults would sit down and have a conversation to begin with. And I think that's where my comparison with Civil War comes in, is that they do. They sit down like adults. They don't agree. They aren't necessarily nice to each other, but they have an adult conversation. What is ultimately the cause of the conflict is the fact that Cap and Tony have very different philosophies. And those two philosophies don't work together, right? You can't have both at the same time. And that's where this feels like you're missing that conversation about the philosophy, which I think they're hinting at here and there,
Mm-hmm.
but they're never fully fleshing out that idea of, we have different philosophies on how to approach problems.
Yeah.
And how are we going to resolve this? How are we going to work through this issue together? And it jumps immediately to violence towards each other, which is not mature. It is not heroic. It is none of those things.
Which is again why we need a world's finest movie with the two of them talking about, why they do what they do. Like we needed to have that movie. And that's that this movie was, and part of it too is that you have to understand that none of these, we've talked about this before, that these movies are not like this one small group of people that decide to make this movie. There's so many chefs that get involved in this, and that you do have Warner Brothers who'd wanted to do a Batman versus Superman movie for decades. And they do it, and that's kind of the mandate. Like, we're going to do this, and like we got to have Superman fight Batman. It has to, like, he's going to be the bad guy, and that's so it's there are some constrictions with that. You have to, I think, to fully appreciate this movie and to enjoy this movie, that you have to just get on board with certain things that some people just don't want to get on board with, and that's totally fine. And this is where I come back to the characterizations, where we're used to seeing, and this is a thing that I've made this point several times. I don't know if I've made it on the podcast, that I think that, for better or for worse, DC has advantage or disadvantage with Marvel, depending on how you look at it, of having a legacy of these characters where you've had so many iterations of these characters. Like, for some people, Christopher Reeve will always be Superman. It doesn't matter. And I used to even say it. I'm like, until he dies, there's no Superman. I don't care about Tom Welling in Smallville. Like, he's not Superman. That's Superman over there, or Dean Cain. There is only one Superman, right? I've softened on that sense in my old age. But same thing with Batman. Like, Christian Bale is Batman, or Michael Keaton is Batman. That's my Batman, right? Well, you don't have that with, my Steve Rogers is the guy from the 1970s cheesy TV show. No, this is the only iteration that you know. And so, I think that that's some of it too. Like, well, if Christopher Reeve would have said, hey, if you want to step outside, let's talk about this like men. Yes, he probably would have, but that's not the version we're getting. And so there's a little bit of that, I think, as well, that you also have the filmmakers going, we can't just copy that, because we did copy that with Superman Returns and people didn't like it. They wanted him to punch stuff. Now he's punching stuff. So pick a lane, right? And some people will just never be happy. And again, I think, well, you mentioned it right at the top, and I love that you did, that a lot of what we're trying to do with this show too is to say, it's okay to have other opinions. It's okay to like films or dislike films. What we're asking you to do is try and find meaning in even films that maybe you don't like. Find things that are, oh, wow, I never noticed that before. There's something interesting there. And then we can have a discussion about it.
Or at the very least, be able to articulate why, right? Why you enjoy it, why you don't enjoy it. And that's along those lines, that's kind of the purpose behind the aspects, is to give you specific concrete things to look for, to to watch for in a film, and to essentially kind of evaluate them, whether they're good or bad.
Agreed. So before we move on to sound, because we've been spending a lot of time at the beginning, I cannot leave this section without talking about two things: the the warehouse fight, especially when they pull back and you get to see him fighting four guys at once. And as Corey would say, it's the greatest Batman fight ever on film.
And I
And I
would
have a hard
tend to
time.
agree. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. And also the scene that actually Justin pointed out to me the other day, our friend Justin Eldon pointed out, it happens twice actually. When Clark, I want to keep calling him Clark, when Superman lands at the Senate building, he lands. He's coming down as the camera pans up. It does it twice. He does it also when he meets Batman on the roof, and it's a kind of a cool dynamic shot that I hadn't really paid it that much attention to in previous viewings. But it's just kind of very. It's a cool way to just add more movement to the shot.
Yeah. And, I think that Zack Snyder and a lot of his work is very visually appealing. And I think that he has a pretty good sense of camera control and like what he's doing with the camera and what he's filming. Most of my problems, if you haven't guessed it already, are not like the construction itself of like moment to moment, you know, scene. That's a nice little moment. You have some moments where it's um like the dirt rising from the casket, where it's just like visually he is telling you something, and when it's like, okay, that's oh, all right, cool. It's the large picture, taking this thing in as a whole, looking at the soul of the film, which it's not there. There's no soul. I said it. But as far as sound, while I think the score was actually pretty good, the words that jumped into my mind immediately were operatic.
Sure.
Lots of soaring and kind of undulating vocals. Fairly different score, I think, from other movies. It also bugged me.
Another thing.
Yeah, because even though I thought the score was good, you know, it the score itself felt like it was trying very hard to be grand and, like I said, operatic
Mm-hmm.
and over the top. And this is important. And I don't think the film is. So,
It's fine to have that opinion. We've talked about Hans Zimmer before too, like
yeah,
specifically with Dune, right? That it's heavy anyway, and then you add this layer of Zimmer heaviness, and it's just like
it's a lot.
it is a lot. And so either you're coming on board for the gravitas or attempted gravitas, or you're kind of bogged down by it. I I like the score a lot. I like the Man of Steel score a lot better. I love the theme, the main title of Man of Steel, the just kind of gently tinkling piano. There's multiple versions of that. That's really good. Slow and melancholy. You have that near the end as well. What was really cool I found this time kind of in research is that Luther's theme is actually built off of that. It's kind of a distorted version, and it's piano as well, and it's bizarre and freaky and weird. But knowing the fact that it is kind of an Superman theme, I think is excellent. But for me, the easily the standout of this score is Wonder Woman's theme. I love that so much, and even how it builds slowly. Like first time you see it at the library, there's just a little sting, just a little bit of strings, and like I think you also hear it when she meets Bruce at the museum where they were talking about the knife that got the Gordian knot and whatnot. You get these little hints of the theme, but you don't get it fully revealed until she actually shows up in costume, and then it's on.
Yes. And I'll take this time to dump a little bit more on the film. That's what I'm here for.
There you go.
With Wonder Woman, and I do agree. I think the theme, it honestly, if I had to pick one song, the Wonder Woman theme is probably my favorite individual track from the soundtrack. It is fantastic. I think it is bizarre how she the film just stops fairly close to like the climax of the film, and she goes onto like YouTube and starts searching for videos of.
It's not. It's an email. It's
So
slightly
we
different.
spend 15 minutes watching an email. Like,
No, we've talked about this before. We did a group watch of this like 2 years ago and talked about how great it would have been to kind of put these things in slightly different order and not let us know that she was Wonder Woman until the very end. To
or
have,
or
like,
just make them an end credit scene.
yeah, that would have been cool too.
That
You could have done
perfect.
that. Yeah,
It would have literally been perfect. That's a
yeah,
that would be a fantastic end credit scene. She
yeah.
opens the email because there's nothing else really going on. So it could
Right.
theoretically be at any time that scene, right? And so you throw that at the end of the film, and then, oh, wow, here's all the other Justice League members that we're going to see. How cool. Like, get excited. But it's just like, why stop the film when you're like, for minutes at a time, when you're trying to build up? It's kind of like how they threw 2 episodes of Mando into the middle of Boba Fett. It's
Yeah.
just like,
So
what are you
I have a
doing?
counter I have a counter for that though, because and I wish I'd came up with this theory, but I did not. But I will jump on it. And that is because some people will argue too, well, where's Wonder Woman been? Why, she left public life in, excuse me, left it in after World War One. And now she sat out World War Two. She sat out the Cold War mostly. We see her in 1984. She shows up a little bit, but still not in the public eye. And some people have argued that this is because she's finally seen there are other people like her, that's her motivation for coming back. And so again, it's maybe you don't buy into that. Maybe that doesn't work for you. But if you consider the fact that she's looking at that and then, oh, though this moment is, I can see that might be reasoning behind the filmmakers putting it there that, oh, okay, I'm not alone. Now is time to get more involved because there are these other people out here. So I would argue that.
I will also say that there's a handful of moments that just don't make any sense in this film. And specifically around Wonder Woman, like when they finally get together, right, to fight Doomsday.
Yeah.
They have this moment where I think Wonder Woman like jumps off and it cuts back to Superman and Batman. And it's the whole, is she with you? No, I thought she was with you.
Oh, it's so funny though.
But doesn't, like, Batman's met her multiple times. So it's like, shouldn't he know who she is?
Yeah, but maybe he still thinks that she's with Superman because they're both superpowered. He doesn't know Superman from Adam.
No, it doesn't make sense.
I love it. It's so great. It's so great. I just wish that stuff wasn't in the trailer. That's my biggest gripe with this film, period, is the fact that Wonder Woman is in the trailer. Because having that reveal in the film, I think would have helped word of mouth a ton and just would have been a way more enjoyable experience. Don't have Doomsday in the trailer either. Just don't tell us anything. Have everything, all the stuff could just be from the first, third of the movie and just go from that. There's plenty of stuff to see there. Maybe you throw the warehouse fight scene in. That's from later in the film, but there's no content. But add no context. You're just like, well, Batman's just awesome, just kicking people's butts. No, it's just like, yeah, he's Batman. Of course he is.
Did you think it was a little weird the way they had Batman move around and stuff? Like, I'm thinking when he was in the very beginning.
Yes.
Okay.
Up in the top.
Yeah.
Out of focus. Very cool. And then he's kind of like swinging around.
But like,
or whatever he's doing, crawling. I don't know what he's doing.
Yeah. To me, it felt a little weird. Like, not the biggest deal. Like,
yeah.
But it just
very
felt
supernatural.
Like, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
It felt, yeah, supernatural is a good word for it. And
well, like, I'm assuming he had gear that would allow him to do that, special gauntlets or something. Because, and again, the conceit that Batman, and that's another thing you have to buy into, is that Batman has been Batman for 20 plus years and somehow is not a public figure. Like, that's some careful stuff. It's sure. It's like Wonder Woman in 1984, where she was there, she showed up and that shopping mall and destroyed all the cameras or whatever. Whatever. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to point out 2 things in sound just really fast.
Sure.
And I'm not the first one to pick this out, but I definitely noticed it this time, and I want to make sure that our audience hears, is that the dream, there's lots of dream sequences in this, and I'm going to mention there's an article that we should read. I'm going to put it in the show notes about the dreams and stuff. There's when he has entering the mausoleum dream where the bat attacks him, that throughout that you have the world engine hum from Man of Steel playing through there, which is very evocative of, it's doom. Like, this is, you're overpowered. Like, it's kind of just going back to that whole powerlessness thing, but this is kind of how he feels. He's being consumed by his rage. He's, he's powerless in that fight. Now he's being consumed by the bat persona, right? The actual animalistic bat persona. That's the way I read that one. And then I also just wanted to mention that I love the voice modulator. I think that's just long overdue for Batman. It makes so much more sense, especially with Bruce Wayne being a public figure. Like his voice would be everywhere. So I really like that addition to the Batman mythos.
Great. Um, as far as performance, I have very brief thoughts because I think the casting, first of all, was quite good. I think the performances were all very spot on. Their performance wise, I didn't have any issues with the performances. I don't think any of them were like amazing, but I think that was, for my perspective, it was more to do with what the actors were given. But I think what they were given, everyone did a very good job with. I will say, like, this isn't my favorite Alfred, but I believe it's Jeremy Irons
Yeah.
is totally fine in it. And again, I think that's more to do with the script than anything else, than his acting. Um, Batfleck, Ben Affleck is an interesting choice for Batman, and I think he pulls it off. Um, yeah, I think the acting is totally fine. I don't think
Yeah.
there's anything wrong with any of the choices that were made.
Okay. Yeah. I've been a fan of Ben Affleck's for a while. I mean, I'm one of those people that says Daredevil is a good film. The 2 hour version, the director's cut, is a good film. Again, that's another one where they butchered it. So maybe we'll do that at some point. But I liked him in, I mean, I like Armageddon. That's one of my wife's favorite movies, and I enjoy that movie as well. I've always liked him with Matt Damon and Good Will Hunting and several of the early Kevin Smith films. But I didn't have a problem with him. I thought he pulled, and I think that he more than held his own as Batman in this film. I wanted to point out, we talked about a lot of the quotes. I like this Alfred. I think that I mentioned earlier, he's kind of Bruce's conscience. And I think that there's a couple of exchanges that they have that I think are really telling. And I wanted to point them out. And then I have one from Superman that we talked about earlier, alluded to at least. Well, when Bruce says, we're criminals, Alfred. We've always been criminals. Nothing's changed. I just really saw that as him just continuing to justify and reconcile whatever he's doing, whatever limit it takes. He's just like, this is just the next evolution of that. And then you also have Alfred saying, that's how it starts, or the fever, the rage, the feeling of powerlessness. It turns good men cruel. And he doesn't say it turns you cruel, but that's heavily implied that that's who he's talking about. And I just look at that, like we're talking about thesis statements, like that's, I don't know if that's Terrio or if that's Goyer who wrote that line, but that to me, like that's the point. That's what's happened to Batman, that he has become just, his rage has overtaken him and the powerlessness. And I think that when we get to, the infamous Martha scene, that's what you're getting, is that he recognizes that now he is, I'll just jump to it right now, that, he is the one who has the power and is over a powerless person, that he's essentially putting Clark in the place that he was at. These reverse roles, right? Now he's Joe Chill in that scene.
Martha, Martha, Martha. Okay.
Love it so much. See, all I can say about that scene is when I watched it in real time, I was like, oh my gosh, I just now realized the moms are the same name. I know where this is going. And it worked for me on an emotional level. Sure. And I know that's not true for a lot of people, and that's fine. You're totally welcome to your opinions. So people think it's silly, whatever. Terrio has said, like, we had to have a moment where you have to have this snap. It has to happen quickly. This is what they gave us. We had to do it. There's like a studio mandate, and this is what they came up with. Yeah, it worked for me, and I know it's worked for a lot of people. A lot of people it didn't work for. That's the beautiful thing about art. It's subjective.
So, I will first agree with you that that's another line that is kind of thesis statement for Batman, that Alfred says, right? That powerlessness turns people cruel. Essentially saying that when people feel powerless, that's when they feel the need to lash out, right? What I think is kind of what feels like a mixed metaphor, because I get what you're saying within the Martha moment, right? Where he is flashing back to that moment when his father said Martha, when they were murdered, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the parents were essentially powerless against Joe Chill, right? But it's like the whole point with this is, I don't know. It, I guess for me, what I can boil it down to, and this is sort of what I came to as a conclusion for this, is that it just feels like a Deus Ex Machina. And you said where it's like they have to have this snap moment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that doesn't work for me.
Yeah. And that's totally fine.
Because it's like, Batman is in this blind rage. He is about to murder Superman with a spear.
Yeah.
And like that to me is not enough to get to knock him out of that murder rage that he's in. Like if you take all of Batman, and I think we actually have a pretty good grasp of the kind of person that Batman is, right? Which is a very different kind of Batman in this movie. But if we take that kind of Batman and all of his thoughts and his radicalization, as we mentioned earlier, I don't think that matters, right? Because if there's like a 1% chance that Superman could kill everybody, he has to be destroyed. I just don't see how that is overridden
Yeah.
by Martha.
Oh, I have more.
Go ahead.
Because okay, so and I think that again, my reading on this changes as I watch it and as I do research and see what other people have said. And I think that what I see now is when Clark says Martha, that he doesn't flip yet. I think that he's just confused, and I think that you can see that in the performance. And I think this is a brilliant thing with costuming, that you start to see like half of his face, like he's regaining his humanity, right? He's at least the cracks are starting to show in this shell that he's this, dense, numb shell that he's put around himself. But when you have Lois come in, now it becomes now all of a sudden it's really complicated too. Like now you're just going to kill a guy in front of this woman. You're going to kill this woman too. You have that, but you also have, he's saying, why did you say that name? He thinks that he's referencing, Bruce's mom. Bruce thinks he's referencing Martha Wayne. And she says it's his mother's name. I think that's really the moment that where you start to have this is a guy with a mother. This isn't just an alien. This isn't just this other thing that I have to destroy. This is a person.
Yeah, but so was the guy he branded earlier in the film. Like he had a mom too.
Yeah, but his mom's name wasn't Martha.
He doesn't know that. And so
it might have been Maria. I don't know.
I hear what you're saying.
Sure.
And that's kind of where I'm at, where it's just like you're building up Batman as a certain kind of person. And I just don't think that at that point, oh, you have a mom named Martha.
Yeah.
You're still an existential threat to me and to Gotham and to the world.
Right.
I just don't see this Batman, getting out of that shell because, oh, you have a mom. Thanos had a mom too. And ironically, many you don't know this, Thanos' mom was, guess what? Martha. Look it up.
Is that true?
No, it's not true.
Okay, because that would have been cool.
But it's like,
I know he's got the G. Yeah. Okay.
You spend all this time like building up this Batman as this,
But see, the cracks are starting to show. Maybe he's not super evil. He just needed that little push.
I do love the armor thing. I did not catch that, but again, that's not character development. That's a very well done production technique. I think that's fantastic, but that's not development. We don't see, Batman's the world's greatest detective. He doesn't find out who Superman is. He doesn't investigate him.
He really should have, because Luthor does.
But see, that's kind of my point. Is like
blind rage, man.
It is. And for the blind rage to just stop on a dime like that is Deus Ex Machina. and that's just not fulfilling. And
It's Martha ex machina.
that's right. It's Martha ex Machina.
It's
That's the new phrase
or
right there.
Deus ex Martha.
Deus ex Martha.
Probably Martha ex machina.
Martha
It's
ex yeah.
Martha in the machine. That makes sense.
It's,
That's what we'll call it. Hashtag Martha
that's the name
ex
of the
machina.
episode. Okay. Um, that it's not earned. I get that's where they're going, and I think you're right. I think that's what they wanted. I think that's what they intended, but it's not earned.
Yeah.
Batman does not experience, like, he doesn't get the amount of information. There's nothing that happens in that fight that would explain who Superman is, right? And Superman even tries to have a conversation with him.
He does, which people have said he doesn't try, but he does. He totally does.
I mean, too late. I mean, you already said Bat is dead, so first impressions, dude. But
never get a second chance.
Never get a second chance for first impressions. But it's like Batman is already in the blind rage, and that's kind of my point. Is like, if you have a rational discussion at the beginning of that fight, that may be before you get into the bloodlust, right?
Yeah,
but that's not what happens.
So I got a lovely counter for you because you brought up Civil War earlier. Because this is my last thing I'm going to say about this, and then I'm going to bring my Clark quote back in. The end fight after they look at the videotape, which is somehow there's a magic videotape that shows Bucky under the influence killing Tony's parents. We've already had the discussion, and even though he knows that Bucky was not in his right mind, and in fact it wasn't Bucky at all, now he's going to fight Bucky and try and kill Cap. That I have more of a problem with than the Martha moment. And that's a discussion probably for another day. But you talk about, so the movie can happen. Sometimes, thanks, Ryan. That's what it is.
But is that good movie making?
Apparently it's excused in a Marvel movie, but not in a DC movie.
Now, I did say that there were other issues with Civil War.
Yeah, no, that's true. And that would be one. And I like that. I love that movie too. I just like that always. All I can say is, and I said it before and I'll say it again, is that movie or that element in Batman v Superman worked for me emotionally. Whereas when I watched Civil War a little later on, I was like, really? I don't buy that. And again, art is subjective and you're entitled to your opinion. And that's wonderful that you can talk about it as long as you're doing it in a civil manner. And you're just stupid. No, you're totally entitled to your opinion. Great.
Yeah. And I do think that this is part of the reason why this movie was difficult for me to watch and really dive deep into, is because there is some level on an emotional level that I did enjoy parts of the film. Yeah. But then it's like, for me, the more I think about it, the dumber the movie feels and the dumber I feel. And that's where I feel like there are some movies that can be extremely successful with that. And I'm not saying that the Batman movies are, dumb action movies or whatever, but I think that, this is the third in kind of a trilogy of episodes that we've done about kind of Batman intros. And we have, was it 79 Nicholson's Batman?
89. Yeah.
89.
Yep. And
there's still a lot of camp, right? There's darkness, but it's pretty buoyed by this campiness, this goofiness, And then you take Nolan's Batman and Batman Begins. It's very grounded in reality, but there's still lots of humor. There's still lots of jokes and, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then in this film, it's like they're trying for a much more philosophical, deeper drama film. Yes. And they're too ambitious. They're Icarus flying into the sun, where they are trying and failing to plumb the depths of this potential that a Batman versus Superman movie have. And that's where it's just like, you're shooting for the moon. I should say you're shooting for the sun for, all this talk about Batman, and is he bad? Is he good? Is Superman a god? Will people accept him? Will he not? Lex Luthor, what the hell is he doing with Doomsday? That's a stupid idea. But it's just like, you're diving into all these ideas, but it's a mile wide and inch deep, and it's trying to be smarter than it is. And that is why I don't like the movie.
I love it so much. I just wish that we restore the Snyderverse so we can get all of those things tied up. All right, here's my line. This is
No,
my last one I want to say.
we can't restore this. I keep seeing you
We,
on our shared Twitter saying restore the Snyderverse, and I just die a little bit inside every
yes,
time I see it.
I need more Men of Steel.
I let you do it
Um,
because I know it's never going to happen. So
oh, that's
a little, a little glimmer
we
of
got
hope,
the Snyder
right?
cut. We got the Snyder cut though. So when Clark says, "This is my world, you are my world," when that happens, that this is him actually choosing, and this is where he sacrifices himself to kill Doomsday. And I wanted to talk about. I'll talk about it now. Actually, this is one of my final thoughts, but I think it's a good thing to bring up now. Is because we're running really long on this episode. And we're gonna just gotta fly through some stuff. Is that you have one of the themes of this? There's a lot of themes. You're right. There is a lot of things going on with this theme with this movie. Is we like to talk about the myth of redemptive violence, and I really looked at this time that Doomsday is that personified. That the more violence you do to him, the stronger he gets. You cannot finish this guy off with violence. The only thing that you can stop him with,
but don't they kill him with violence?
the only way they kill him though, is with Clark's sacrifice. He kills him with love for the world, man. Again, going back to the Christ figure. And this, again, you see, and there's a beautiful shot. It's not hard to find that you see when they bring him down, because it's kind of up on a hill. It's again, the imagery is, it's very much on the nose. You can see 3 telephone poles that have been warped into like cross shapes. Like it's Christ coming down from Golgotha. It is with the Trinity standing there. This is Snyder's, this is the way he sees Superman. Like he is Jesus. He sacrificed himself to save us. He could not have done it by fighting. And that's another thing I would have said earlier. When he's in the Senate chambers and he doesn't say anything, this is Jesus going before Pilate and all those guys. Like, I'm just going to stand here and I'm just going to take it. I'm just going to let you say your piece. And then finally, we'll move on, because this is where it's at, man. I'm in. Let's do it. It's okay. I can see you laughing. That's fine.
I just, I haven't read that section of the Bible in a little while. So I do kind of forget where the lead line bomb went off in Pilate's office.
Again, speaking of the Ultimate Edition, you have that scene later in when he says to Lois, he's like, I think I didn't see it because I didn't want to see it.
Right.
And then they have the scene where it's like, no, it was lead lined. Luther is so smart. He did this. He's manipulating these guys. And like, you didn't think that was important for characterization. You just have ambivalent, doesn't give a crap about people Superman versus, wow, he got outsmarted or, manipulated or what have you.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah. Superman comes off really, really poorly in the theatrical edition. He's like murdering guys with guns.
Horrible.
And didn't care enough to stop a bomb.
Right.
Versus he wasn't even there. And, it happened in Superman the movie too, which you haven't seen yet, but you need to. We'll do that at some point.
So I have to say,
Lex Luthor's always figuring stuff out, man.
Though that what you said was beautiful about the myth of redemptive violence, and I think I had never considered Doomsday as a personification of that idea, but I think that is 100% spot on. I think that's a beautiful way to put it, and honestly, it makes me appreciate the movie just a little bit more. Not much,
a little bit more. Hey, that's all I'm asking.
A little bit more. Now,
so you'll at least watch the movie because you finished this movie and you haven't finished Man of Steel, but you need to.
I do think that it's muddled in I get the sacrifice, right? Yeah. But I do think it's a little ironic that it's still violent, that you're still killing Doomsday with violence. Yes, it's sacrifice, but it's still a violent sacrifice.
Sure. I hear what you're saying.
I think you have a better grasp of the potential of this story than the people making it did. And that's where I said earlier, I like your version of BVS better than Snyder's version. This is what I'm talking about. That would be a beautiful story. That would be beautiful. I honestly think that right there is in some ways similar, like Luke's sacrifice in The Last Jedi. Mm-hmm. That is very much the myth of redemptive violence. He's not going to be violent, but he's going to figure out a way to save everybody. That also takes a lot of creativity and circumstances, where it's like you can't have force projection in BVS. So, but it's like
you do have a ghost though with his dad, because that's a Terrio thing apparently.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's
like
true.
Han Solo and whatever. Yeah. So,
last couple things, unless you have something you want to.
No, go ahead.
So I do want to talk about the desert scene.
Yeah.
Which I also think is just wild that it's in this film at all. Putting aside Flash coming in at the end, which is just a weird, like, I get that it's like connected universe, right?
Oh, okay. Oh, you're talking about the nightmare sequence.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because it does. There's multiple nightmare.
Oh, that's true. Yes.
Desert. Oh, yeah. The nightmare with a K.
Yes.
Yeah,
so
go for it.
Putting aside Flash, because I think that's also a very odd choice, but it's also kind of separate, right? Because it's kind of hinting at larger universe.
Yes.
It's just a weird scene. I mean, on one hand, just the execution of the scene. Parts of it are really cool. Batman's costume, very cool. The fact that everyone with their guns runs up and swings them at Batman instead of just shooting him.
You love that when that happens.
I can't not see it. It's horrible. Like, it's one thing if because isn't it in like the warehouse fight? Doesn't he throw like little bombs or something on their weapons when he first comes in?
Yeah, he does.
And so it's like, okay, if you do something like that and it's like, oh, their guns are disabled, so they're using them as a club. Sure. It's nitpicky. I know.
They had just ran out of bullets, like just before this scene.
But I can't not see it where the guy runs up and with his gun, and then Batman punches him, and it's just like, what are you doing?
So cool. Breaks that guy's neck.
But then it just feels so out of place, because since the first time I've seen it, I've read more DC comics. And so it fits a little bit better into my personal knowledge of the DC universe. Like, it makes more sense to me now. But coming in as a relative outsider to DC stories, it's like, I don't know what's going on. It's like, what is all this? Why are the locusts coming, from the air? Sure. And why is Batman doing the laser eyes and vaporizing people? Like, none of this tracks. Like, it is just completely random. And I feel like it's something that, again, would have been really interesting as a post-credit scene. But I don't think it belongs in the main film. I don't think it does.
There's been some arguments to that. I think this is another thing, that there are some very intentionally vague things in this film. I think they're intentional. And part of that is, again, there's a great article, and I'm, like I said, I'm going to put it in the show notes. I mentioned this before. It's called Applying Suspense to Archetypal Superheroes, Hitchcockian Ambiguity in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And it references, I won't go into it here because it's pretty long, we're running long on time, but I highly encourage everybody to check it out. It does talk a lot about, in Hitchcock movies, having sequences where you're like, I'm not sure if that's a dream or if it's a memory. And that being like part of how those movies worked as thrillers. And that's kind of what you're seeing here, where like, is it a dream? Is it a dream within a dream? What's the purpose of that? What we know from it is that he takes it as motivation to stop Superman by whatever means necessary. And you have a couple of things where you're like, I'm not sure exactly what role Darkseid and or Steppenwolf are playing in this film. We get a little bit of, we have the scene at the very end, again, of the Ultimate Edition, where you see Luthor communing with Steppenwolf. And he's different at the end of this movie than he is throughout most of it. Like, I read it as he's been, I don't know if brainwashed or manipulated in some form that way. And I'm assuming that that's something of what's happening with Bruce as well, with the nightmare sequence, and how you're getting that, where you're kind of like, we need to push these pieces together this way so that it opens the door for, Darkseid and the whole, his army and all of that stuff. So that's the way I read it. And I'm just thinking, you mentioned this earlier, like, I have a different version of the movie in my head than you do, or than the filmmakers had. We've had this discussion about Star Wars now too, where it's like, it's a multimedia thing. Like, I still don't like the movie. but I can appreciate Rise of Skywalker more because I know the ancillary material. And so I fill in the gaps subconsciously. And I know I do that with this film as well, that I'm like, okay, well, that's what that is. I'm good. Okay, that's, yep, okay. And so maybe it's rationalization, maybe it's just appreciation, maybe it's just interpretation, whatever it is. Again, I've said it before, I'll say it again. It's art in one form or another. And everyone's entitled to their opinion. So hopefully enjoy it, at least for, if nothing else, the technical aspects, where you can, like we said, at least discuss them intelligently.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point about the ambiguity. There's a YouTube video that I quite love, and it's actually about ambiguity in film. Specifically, the person uses annihilation. Have you ever seen that? It's a
I have not.
it's a very deep and heavy film. It's not light watching, but it has an ambiguous ending. And the person in the YouTube video, his point was that ambiguity specifically is used so the audience has to make connections on a thematic level.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a black and white answer. You're supposed to imply based on what the characters have done, what they have said, the whole drill, right? It's thematic. And I see that. I could see how the nightmare scene could be ambiguous, right? It is kind of ambiguous. It is kind of out of nowhere. But then that to me kind of reads as, okay, what are the thematic implications of this? And I get that it's used as motivation, and I think that's true. I don't know. It just doesn't track for me, even though like by itself, I think it's kind of a fun enough scene, just
Right.
as like
It looks cool.
it looks cool.
It's in IMAX.
Yes. So
and it's revisited in Snyder Cut.
Yeah. Yes. Which
you get a little bit more of that.
Like,
I love that so much. I was so excited when that came back.
I have issues with that as well.
We should do that at some point.
That's for another episode.
It is another one. So on that note, do you have any other final notes before we wrap up?
No, I think I have ranted my piece more than enough for one episode.
So here's my last thing, and it's literally it's a quote, more or less, it's a paraphrase. Should Superman act unilaterally? If Superman exists, must there be a Superman? And if he did, is it okay if he acts unilaterally? Would you be okay with that?
That is a very deep question for an old man at 8:30 at night.
Yeah. My answer might have been different an hour ago.
That is a very difficult question.
Yeah. I don't have an answer. I think it's an interesting question, and I love that the movie asks that you go, maybe it's okay that we are a little bit skeptical sometimes.
Yeah. I think it's a great question because it's open-ended. There's no right or wrong answer necessarily. I don't have an answer for you. I would have to think about that much harder than right, than I have time for right now. I think it's a wonderful question that is one of the more interesting aspects that the film brings up.
Yeah. So if you're listening, we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, do you think should Superman act unilaterally? Because again, there's lots of right answers there.
So as we close, we just want to say thank you so much for listening. If you would like to connect with us, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook. Email us at readingbetweenreels@gmail.com or use the SpeakPipe app on our website.
And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast catcher. We'd love to hear your feedback, especially about that question, should Superman act unilaterally? And it really helps us get the word out about the podcast, guys. Those reviews are huge. And if you haven't yet, you can join our Facebook group and talk about things there. It's a safe place to share your thoughts and discuss all things related to movies.
One last thing. Our next episode will be a review of Taika Waititi's Jojo Rabbit. Send us an email or voicemail about your favorite moments from Jojo Rabbit, and we'll share them on the next episode.